Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
and a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human,
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture,
and what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion.
Hey, Erin.
Hey, Kelley. How's it going?
Hi. It's going pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, no complaints. It's beautiful here in St. Louis right now.
I know. I'm ready for fall.
I feel like we're in it. I mean, it's like a perfectly fall day.
It is a perfectly fall day right now, but we'll see how it gets in the next week. But yeah, no, it feels really good. It feels really good. So I am super excited for our guest today, Reverend Dr. Nichole Torbitzky, and I'm using all of her titles because she earned each one of them, and I'm sure she put in a lot of work. So we're going to use those. She is a professor of religion at Lindenwood University, where she is also the chaplain. Nichole got her seminary degree from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and then she got her doctorate from Claremont Graduate University in Claremont, California. And Claremont, I don't know if you know this, Erin, is kind of the place to study if you're going to study process theology. And two people we've had on as guests before, Jay Oord and Jonathan Foster, are of that ilk of the process, open relational theology, which we've gotten a lot of great feedback from listeners who have heard those podcasts. So if you were a fan of those episodes, you're gonna definitely want to stay tuned in and listen to Nichole and all that she has to share with us. And I'm going to share this sentence, Nichole. I'm going to share from your bio, because I love, and I really want you to explain it to us too. So her current research investigates Whiteheadian notions of subjective form and the internal relations subjective form has on the ordering of eternal objects in the primordial nature of God.
That's what you want me to talk about?
Well, I just want you to explain what that sentence means, because that's amazing. But also, just so you know, all the listeners know, Nichole teaches about lots of different things. She teaches on religion, world religions, Islam, Indian religions, history of Christianity, women in religions. She is just she leads work in interfaith studies and interests on campus. And so we're really excited to talk to her about a number of different things that we're curious about. So, Nichole, thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about, can you give us a little explanation as to kind of what your research involves?
Yep. So if any of your listeners have already talked with or listened to your talks with Jonathan and Thomas, then you're probably aware of this idea of God as omnipotent rather than omnipotent, right? So omnipotent means all loving rather than all powerful. And so if you have a God who is in a power sharing relationship, I guess maybe that's the best way to say it, then that means God is responsive to the things that happen in the world. So in so doing, right? So we make decisions and then God is responsive to those decisions. And the way that process theology sees God as being responsive to those decisions, as having God's own divine subjective form. Well, how do I put subjective form into language that lay people is more accessible? So the way God feels the world, the way God understands the world, and honestly, the way God puts the world together in a way that creates harmony in God's own being, we will call the subjective form, how God feels the world. And that then is where the Christian concept of grace could be used, right? God feels us as our best possible and the best harmony that could possibly be put together. And based on that vision of the world, when God helps us get ready for the next moment, when we get an aim at or what invitation to the next best thing we could do in our next moment, like that's based not necessarily entirely on maybe the bad decision I made in the past, but instead is based on God's vision for what could be better. And boy, isn't that like that's grace, right? That's graciousness.
Yeah.
And so that feels to me like what atonement would be like, right? What at one-ment with God would be like.
I love that. I love that. So do you teach, do you talk about that in your classes when you talk about Christian, like history of Christian thought or?
Yeah. So I teach a theology class, and so Whitehead will be kind of towards the end of the theology class because there's so much to do beforehand. And then over the course of the years, I've had a student or two be like, hey, I want to read Whitehead with you. I'm like, no, you don't.
Do you want your mind to explode?
But I had one student sit down and spend a semester reading Process and Reality with me. And it was fun. It was fun. He's a brilliant student. I was really lucky to be able to do it. But typically I can't keep it out, right? I can't keep it out of at least how I understand how the world works and how religions work and how God works. But I definitely don't get to use the very technical terms that make my nerd heart so happy.
But I bet it actually moves into your chaplaincy work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And at Lindenwood, we're not we're not a denominational university, and we're not religiously affiliated. So we have students from all walks of life here. And one of the good things about being a process theologian is that makes space for people, regardless of their religious or not religious needs, for me to help with that, I guess, because I'm not so, because process theology allows for people to pursue their best possible, and it doesn't have to be my best possible. Right. So it puts me in a unique position to be helpful to everyone at our university instead of, and I don't want to be talking bad about colleagues, but there are colleagues out there who use their positions as chaplains to help non-Christians become Christian. And I don't necessarily think that might not be the best way to deal with everyone, because not everyone's needs are going to be Christian needs. But so I don't want to be critical. Chaplaincy is a hard job. University chaplaincy is difficult.
Yeah, I bet. And especially right now, and there's so much kind of turmoil in university settings right now. Have you seen any of that at Lindenwood?
Yeah, this is going to be real interesting to see. So we're a private university, which means we have a little more leeway to do the things we want to do instead of following the rules that state schools have to follow. And we're going to see what happens. Like, we've seen more diversity on campus, and our college campus is just a little miniature version of what's happening in the United States. So there's so much religious diversity on campus. But when I ran the numbers this year of those students who would report their religious affiliation, there's just as many nuns or like I don't have one, or atheist, or like I don't knows. And even people who consider themselves agnostic, there's as many of them as there are people who claim a religion. So the nuns are growing. And at the same time, then we see those people who are Christian, not all of them, but we see a move towards attempting to really claim and proclaim that identity in a way that isn't necessarily very welcoming to people who don't have that identity. So we see that happening. We see that kind of Christian nationalism, I guess, kind of, and not even just that, because that's not fair to people who are just committed Christians, but not necessarily committed to the United States. But I see both of those things kind of coming in a way that wasn't there even 10 years ago when I started this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
What do you think the driver is? Like, what are the drivers of that? Those movements on that, in the two Christian categories, if you will.
So, as far as I can tell, it seems to me like religious nationalism in general is just on the rise across the world. Right? So Hindu nationalism is on the rise in India, and it's causing tensions with the Muslim populations, and I mean, even the Buddhist and Christian populations. We see religious nationalism on the rise in China, even though they don't call it religious nationalism, but all of a sudden the government is behind Confucian ritual and ideas. And so even though they don't call it a religion, they call it a philosophy, it still has a lot of the marks of religion. And that's that's if you're Chinese now, you're Confucian, right? So we see these kinds of things on the rise across the globe, and the United States is no different. And we see that kind of identity politics. Like, they don't like to hear that because identity politics gets associated with things that Christian nationalists typically don't like, but it is a kind of identity politics. And I think that's part of what it is. And that is all. I mean, there's so much history to like what that is. So that's the backlash to post World War II, where we really made a big push to find our commonalities. We made a big push to find our commonalities, and rightly so, at least for that time period. But I think then people started to feel like they're losing their specialness, their own identity, the things that makes a person or a group particular and wonderful. And I think kind of combine that with all of the fallout of colonialism and the changing world powers. And I think we end up with this kind of religious nationalism across the board and across the world.
Which
interesting.
Can be it can be actually like religious people really saying like, I feel like we are a Christian nation and we need to uphold these Christian ideals. It can also be just a political platform to kind of move back to kind of a more nostalgic and kind of time that is, I think, just more conservative. Too,
Are you
right?
Are you guys familiar with the book The Fourth Turning? It's like Neil Strauss and I'm trying to remember. It's Strauss and Howe. I can't remember the other guys, but they basically break down like society into these like 80, 100-year reoccurring cycles where like, and it's kind of like generational, right? So it's these 20, 25-year bits of time, but it's like this period of expansion. And then you have a period of spiritual exploration, rebellion. Then individualism starts triumphing, defeating institutions. And then you go through some like really tumultuous turmoil, like maybe a world war or something like that. And then the cycle starts over. And so maybe it's also just that we're moving through these cycles that are reoccurring.
I mean, yeah, I think so. And so I hear a lot of I think you're absolutely right. And I hear a lot of despair from like kind of both sides of this issue. Like, America is failing. And for Christian nationalists, America is failing because we're not a Christian nation. And for people who see Christianity as much more universal, feel like we're failing because we're not being as universal and inclusive as we could be. And I would beg to differ with both of those extreme positions. And so Erin, that's exactly the way to think of it. We move through cycles historically of more reform, and then more progressive, and then as Kelley liked to say, kind of reaching back for a nostalgic past that didn't actually exist, but we want that so-called golden age back because everything was perfect. In the 50s? No, it wasn't. It's far from perfect.
Right. And and I wonder what that inciting incident was to make, and I have to, because of the the prominence of white Christian nationalism. And I read that the difference between a Christian, because there can be Korean Christian nationalists and Black Christian nationalists, and these are people who just believe, right, that these Christian ideals should be part of, our government structure. But white Christian nationalism is identified by two things, and that's that they believe that white Christians are the most discriminated against group. They believe that they are really, on the edges, on the margins, and that two, the response to that being marginalized is aggression and violence, predominantly through guns and the owning of guns. This is what have you heard anything like that, Nichole?
Well, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So as far as Pew did a research, the Baylor religion study back in 2017. Have you read any of these statistics? Okay, so then they looked at, the Baylor religion study looked at, a religion survey looked at the markers for Christian nationalism. Like what are the markers that we see? And one of the things that was really interesting to me is that 65% of the Black and African American people who were interviewed would lean towards what we'd call Christian nationalism, but not white Christian nationalism. And so you're exactly right. So white Christian nationalists tend to be much more into the militaristic part of what Christian nationalism is, and are really often only vote on the gun issue, and tend to see violence as maybe not the best, but the necessary way to defend whatever it is that they feel like they need to be defending, but especially to keep their rights that they feel are being taken from them.
Right.
And,
and so that's why I'm like, I remember I heard Brene Brown say, we are in the last holding on of the white man, and it's going to be rough. This is going to be rough.
I mean, by sheer numbers, unfortunately, that's just true. But I mean, I like white men. Let me just say that.
I do
given
too.
Birth to two, and they're wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've given birth to them. I've married one. But I do wonder if we haven't been in a war like a World War II, or I'm just wondering, what is that inciting incident that's caused us to go into this?
Well, I think part of it too is this is, I don't know, this is my perspective, but some of this has to do with economic inequality and opportunity, right? So I think sometimes we tend to kind of have this perspective that white men have always had all the power and all the privilege, and there's some truth to that, right? They have been in charge of the world for most of the world. However, at the same time, there's huge cohorts of white men that have also been indentured servants and slaves, and have been in positions where they have no power. And so as these elite groups of people, and now increasingly that's multicultural, multiracial, continue to have enormous economic success, there's these large groups of people that are hey, I've never actually had any power. I've never really had access to education. And now I'm even more screwed than before, because everybody hates this group of people, and so I think that's part of what's manifesting here.
Yeah.
I agree. And this same study, this Baylor study, broke it down by gender, and it seems like it's women who skew towards Christian nationalism slightly more than men. Men tend to skew away from it, believe it or not.
Really?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was surprising to me.
That's very surprising.
And Erin, to your point, you're exactly right. There is a whole group of people out there who are white and male and haven't had access to that kind of power, and then kind of get hated on. Like they're the only group in the United States that we're allowed to hate on right now.
Yeah.
Allowed to hate on.
Well, even like from that political perspective, you see if you go to like, the Democrats, like their platform, it's like, here's all the groups we serve. And it's every subgroup of people possible except white men. And you're like,
but why not?
Right. No, I totally hear that. And so do you think there isn't like any one thing? It's just
I don't think there's any one thing. I think this is part of cultural growing pains.
Yeah.
And it's uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people. And I don't think it will last forever, though. And I'm definitely not worried that this is the beginning of the end, right? Like we're going to end up at the Handmaid's Tale or like some kind of apocalyptic nonsense. I don't think that will happen. I think that that change is painful.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I agree with you. I don't think that every once in a while I'm like, oh, Canada, maybe we should buy land or like near that border. But I mean, when I think realistically, I do sort of feel like the United States in particular has robust checks and balances. And even if you were to, vote in an administration whose goal was to be like, we're going to try to dismantle as much of that as possible, I think they would have a very difficult time doing that. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't do a lot of damage in that process, but would they be successful in actually like, taking it to that extreme? I don't think seems very likely here, but I think it could, there could be a lot of turmoil in that process.
Absolutely. And there are certainly states. I mean, what seems to be happening right now is that more power is coming back to the states to kind of set these kinds of things. And there certainly will be states who will row back as much
as they can.
Right. But that's going to be tricky. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're seeing that right now. So even just like the power to the people so I don't know if anyone's been following.
Missouri.
Yeah, this Amendment 3, to have abortion access in Missouri. So they got 380,000 signatures collected to just put it on the ballot,
which is more
to let the people decide. And they had like I think it was like 5 weeks to do it. I mean, basically the government at every juncture has attempted to like thwart the ability to just put it to a vote of the people. And now a judge who apparently is the cousin of Rush Limbaugh, overturned it to try to prevent it from being on the ballot. And I think they have a week to appeal it because the ballots are going to be printed in a week. So
and the reason he said it's that they didn't get the signatures correctly was because they needed to not just put down like what it was going to change, but how it was going to potentially change other laws.
It's impossible to know that. You can't know that. Like, I mean, it doesn't. I don't. Anyway, they'll win the appeal, but now they have a week to. Anyway, this is a whole side conversation, but
there's a reason why people who are really against having abortion access don't want it to go to a vote, because they put it to a vote in Kansas, and guess what? Kansas allows, like, the people of Kansas spoke and said, no, we want abortion to be safe and legal. And this cracks me up because they don't have legal weed, but we've got legal weed in Missouri.
Right. I mean, I think every state that it's gone up to vote in, it's passed.
Yeah.
Which is also why Trump doesn't want to touch it. Right.
Yeah,
he does not want to touch it.
Yeah, in Arkansas, they did the same thing where they went and tried to get signatures to like put on the ballot, and I think like everyone in the whole state signed the petition to put it on the ballot. I mean, it's just like it's not a winning issue. I mean, people don't want people to be in emergency situations where people are going to potentially die. I mean, we have a lot of friends that are physicians. My wife is a doctor, and so works in the emergency room. And it's like these situations are serious and can result in people's deaths. And doctors in these states are afraid to work with patients because they don't want to go to jail. And even if it is a situation where they probably could help them, they're too afraid to do it.
Right. And we know that as a developed nation. The United States has an atrocious maternal and fetal death rate. I mean, it's atrocious for being a developed nation. And a lot of it has to do, and it continues to get worse, and a lot of it has to do with this. Failure of our doctors. Anyway, that took a turn.
Yeah. Well, there we go. I mean, we're recording this 2 days before the debate, and we're coming up on, like, it's getting close, and so things are happening. And so, this idea that, if is it Alan Lightman who has, like, predicted the presidential campaigns for, like, I don't know how many of the last cycles. And I just saw he came out and said, well, Kamala Harris is going to win. And so my fear is then, in terms of white Christian nationalism and the aggression there, if Kamala wins, like, what's going to be the backlash? Is there going to be violence? Is there going to be another, it's scary times.
Well, I guess the Capitol will just be on higher alert this time around.
Hopefully.
Yes. So I'm curious, like, your role as a university chaplain. Like, that's not, I don't know that I've ever had a conversation to someone who's had that role. It's, I mean, I'm sure it's a fascinating job. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah.
It's absolutely wonderful. I'm really lucky in that, like, you kind of rattled off my degrees earlier, and I have a Master of Divinity, which makes me like an ordained person. And then I have a PhD, which makes me like, that's the highest academic degree. So I have the highest practical degree and then the highest academic degree. And that makes it so that I have kind of unicorn skills. And I found this unicorn job where they're like, we want you to use both your degrees, right? Come and be our chaplain, but also we need you to teach. And it's been amazing.
Yeah.
Because I can stand in front of a classroom and talk about, like, we're going to do the academic study of religion. I'm leading a class right now on the Bible. And I get a lot of very young, fresh people who are so excited about Jesus. And they're going to take the Bible and it's going to confirm all of their beliefs. And then I stand in front of them. I'm like, no. We're going to do the academic study of religion. And this is different than Bible study. And you're going to hear things that you disagree with or that you don't like or that might not confirm some of your most cherished beliefs. And that's okay, right? You can still have your most cherished beliefs. That's fine. And I hope this helps you kind of feel better or become a better Christian. And in my ideas, the more you know about the Bible, the easier it is to be faithful, even if you don't agree with the documentary hypothesis, right? And so that is a lot of fun. And those same students who will disagree with me in class about, are there 4 documents in the Pentateuch or did Moses write it, will come and find me afterward and be like, hey, I'm having a trouble with this.
Yeah, and these are things that send kids into, like, existential crisis, right? Because as soon as you pull out, it's like a Jenga thing.
Yep. That's the danger of
goal, though.
No, not at all. But that's the danger, I think, of sometimes when you are raised in a structure that doesn't allow any, like, an ability to question anything, or that it's like it's absolute, because then it makes you really vulnerable to, like, oh, this is actually historically, like, that's not true. Then it's like, well, what else isn't true, right? Everything kind of starts to fall, fall out. Yeah.
Right. And I almost inevitably, in especially classes with my younger students, almost inevitably someone asks me, well, how can you continue to be Christian and not believe the Bible, like, floated down out of heaven? Just like that.
Yeah. But isn't that a great thing to be able to show them? Like, yes, I can have this kind of rigorous, intellectual, academic relationship with this document, and I can also have this
faithful Christian.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell them. I'm like, look, I don't worship the Bible.
Yeah.
Right. I worship a living God and an exemplar, right? God become human in Jesus Christ.
Mm.
And that is who I worship. And the Bible is a very important and helpful document in guiding what that means. But that's not like God.
Yeah.
So I'm United Church of Christ, right? Like God didn't stop speaking then. There's
Yeah.
more because we have the Holy Spirit that continues to speak with us. And so that gets my Pentecostal students. They're like, yeah, the Spirit is still speaking. I'm like, okay, at least I got them.
Well, and that's so, yeah, the UCC, I love the UCC, that God is still speaking. And then also with process and your background in process theology, that is also about change and forward momentum and evolution of thought and experience, and that God is not static, right?
Right.
So there's
Yep. And that makes it, that has provided the kind of metaphysical and theological framework to be able to not have to rest my faith entirely on a Bible that developed over thousands of years with all sorts of different authors. It's not unanimous in its ideas about how God works or what righteousness looks like. And if you can understand, like I do, that God works with the world in every moment that comes into being in order to draw us on to the best possible, then I don't have to have the Bible to be the only way God can speak. And sometimes it leaves space that sometimes the best possible isn't always great, right? Like sometimes as a human being with limited resources and power and the natural conflicts that come up and just being human and attempting to be alive, the best I can do isn't always very good. And there's some real grace there, right? Like I can do the best that I can in this moment. And if I do that, then maybe I can do a little bit better in the next moment and a little bit better in the next moment. And then that kind of leads to an important criticism of not of the way people have interpreted what Whitehead said, which is that we're on a trajectory towards like the modernist ideas of we're on a teleological trajectory towards the perfect, and that eventually we'll get to God's perfect. And that's not it either, right? Like we're in a constant relationship with God, and that relationship is unending, like it's forever. And we're not headed towards perfection. We're headed towards continuing to be in the cycle of relationship with each other and with God, right? That's what God wants, is good relationship with us and God, and then us and each other. And Jesus reflects this. I'm sorry, I'm going to preach for a second.
No,
Jesus
go for
reflects
it.
this.
Preach.
The Pharisees try to trap him. They're like, well, what's the most important commandment? And Jesus does what good, well-educated Jewish scholars does. He's like, well, the most important is love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your, like with everything that you've got. But the second is the same as the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. Right? And so it's not, we don't love, and so this kind of goes back to the Christian nationalist ideas. And this is where I think that they veer from what it means to be Christian, is loving God isn't loving God, right? Loving your neighbors as yourself is loving God. And so when we say that America is Christian, well, that doesn't love our Jewish neighbors. It doesn't love our Muslim neighbors. It doesn't love our Hindu neighbors, right? Like to say that to be Christian is to be American doesn't love our African Christian brothers and sisters, right? It doesn't love our Chinese brothers and sisters who are so persecuted and trying so hard to be faithful in a context that is so difficult to be. And so it is like there's a really, it's idolatry is what it is.
Yeah.
Right? It makes America a God instead of a God who calls us to be universal.
Mm.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll be done preaching.
That's well said. That's well said. No, that was good. I was like, you are such a professor. Like, I love that. You just really like went into the professor mode. It was so good. And I was like, I could listen to her talk all day.
My students disagree. They're like, oh my God, when is it going to be done?
No, that is awesome. Yeah, preach and teach, do it all. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because when we're looking at these people saying like, we want our nation to be Christian, they're not like, yeah, that means we want our nation to be based in love and justice. And no, they're talking about an identity.
Yeah. A real identity
that is exclusive of other identities.
Yeah. Right. So it's not like we see these people who run around like, this is a Christian nation and we are a Christian nation, and then not passing laws that do what Jesus would have done, like take care of people's health care and make sure that everybody is well fed. Instead, and this is why Christian nationalism, at least as an insider to the religion, this is why Christian nationalism isn't Christian. It's just nationalism. Because it's all about keeping certain people in power. And this isn't white men, right? I mean, it is, but it's not them as a class. It's a particular group of people who have had power and are trying to hold on to power.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It enshrines specific, like patriarchal and racist views that are not Christian at all.
Yeah.
And I saw a great bumper sticker the other day, and it was like, what did it say? It said, Christian nationalism is the Taliban.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's not wrong, right? I mean, the Taliban is an Afghani nationalist group, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And this kind of rules that are being instituted in Afghanistan, like there are people who call themselves Christian nationalists who would institute those same kinds of rules here in the United States if they could.
Yeah, they could. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. If you look at that 2025 document, right? There are some pretty Taliban-y like things in there.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah. I know when you and I talked once before, I think I'd asked you about whether you had read the and I don't remember your answer, if you had read Jesus and John Wayne.
I haven't read it. I need to read it. Everything that I've heard about it has been really, really helpful.
Yeah. Well, we'll have you back on at some point, and we'll talk to you about like the Christian patriarchy.
Right.
But I mean, not that you have to read that book to talk about Christian patriarchy. I mean, but the idea of the book is just, and I know you know this, but for our listeners, just that the patriarchy of Christian history has kind of been exalted in this idea of like the cowboy and that character, that trope. And it's funny to me that in this space that we're in right now, like, I don't know if you're a TV person, there's a lot of very popular Westerns that I know my conservative family will not miss, and that have really no Christian ideals in them, but they are just like, are. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think that maybe it somewhat speaks to kind of what we were talking about before. Like there's this desire for like, the rugged individualism, right, part, but maybe it's more like, and I get this too, like I feel this way. I mean, I grew up in the country, so I like, there is this a little bit of a nostalgia for like a simpler time. Now I work in technology, and it's like crazy, and everything is changing so fast, and there's so much information, and you're just like overwhelmed, and you're like, it might be nice to just go to Montana where no one is there, and there's just like mountains. I don't know. I kind of get that,
Yeah. I mean, if it was just Montana mountains, yeah.
Right.
There's a lot more.
And the point, I think one of the points that Jesus and John Wayne is attempting to make is that like rugged individualism is fine, and that's all well and good, but that is really an American value.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a Christian value, right? Like all of the things that we see in the biblical witness are about people doing this together. And And this idea that in order to be like the right kind of Christian, you have to be all alone and carry your cross all by yourself. And you need to be kind of savior complexes. And that isn't, I mean, that's not what most of the biblical witness is, right? And none of us are called to be Jesus, right? We're called to pick up our own cross, not Jesus's cross. I warn people about that all the time when we do Bible studies or I preach to them. Like, here's a story about the prodigal son. And which character are you? Right? Well, most of us are the brother. And so when you read a story about Jesus and the disciples, and if you're identifying with Jesus, you're not doing it right. Like, we're the disciples, right? We're the people who are need to be taught. We're not the people who are the Son of God, right? Or God incarnate, right? And that's, I think one of the great things that Jesus and John Wayne talks about is that there's a community that happens. There's relationship that happens. And then, at least in the way I understand the world, it's relationality that is the glue that holds us together, right? That holds all of existence together.
Yeah. And then I think, the other part of her thesis too is that in that rugged individual, in co-opting that as a Christian ideal, there's also this sense that women are there to support the rugged individualist rather than, be part of an equal and supportive community.
This is, God bless him. I'm not going to out the professor. In my PhD program, a professor was talking to us about how Jesus was alone on the cross. He was abandoned and he was left alone on the cross. I raised my hand. I'm like, no, he wasn't. The women were there. And he launched into a half an hour on why women didn't count. So like the presence of women, you're still alone if you're in the presence of women.
Yeah. Well, isn't it that in certain times, like if it was a group of women, it wasn't worth documenting. But as long as one man was there, then you could document it. But it would be documented as a gathering of men. Yeah.
It's interesting how it's women who are the majority of the workers and the majority of the people and the majority of the money that comes into our churches. And still they're excluded from most of the hierarchy and most of the decision making.
Yeah. So how was that for you? As somebody who decided to go get their MDiv, what did you receive any pushback? Was that something you had to experience?
I got fortified before I went into this. So in my family, we have a minister every other generation for as far as we have family records. So there's every other generation. We have a preacher, and then we have a generation of preachers' kids. And my dad was definitely a preacher's kid. And then I came along, and my granddad, when I got my call at 14, I went to my granddad, who was a preacher. I was like, hey, I think I'm going to go into ministry. Like, how do you know that you have a call? And he's like, well, we need you got to pray on it. Let's pray about it. And so that year, it was Christmas Day, and we were all together for Christmas Day. And that year, I'm going to get misty. My granddad handed me the Bible, and he's like, you read the Christmas story this year.
Oh.
And that acceptance from he was a pretty conservative guy, even though he was United Church of Christ. He was relatively conservative. He was really pretty old school, but he was so glad and grateful for my call. And that fortified my heart, right? His response fortified my heart.
Yeah.
So I have over the years, I get little lady a lot. You know what I mean? Like, you get the little pat, oh, aren't you cute? Like, okay, you can, I can't spend a lot of time on people who aren't going to engage. Like, if you're going to dismiss me, then you're my time. Right.
Yeah.
And I'll move on to people who are worth my time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And certainly there's a time to stand and fight, but those aren't usually in face-to-face conversations with people who have decided about the place of women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's other ways to go about that.
And you're in a good place because you can do that. Like if you were a female pastor in in like a rural community where you were the only female pastor.
I've done that.
Yeah, you've done that.
I've done it twice now. My first call,
Wow.
I was in a little community right outside of Pittsburgh, and I was the only female pastor. And some of those churches were really, really conservative Protestant churches. So the Catholic priest wouldn't join us, but the other, even pretty evangelical and conservative ministers, they let me join the ministerium, and they would show up, and
Really?
they invited me to the outings. They went golfing a whole lot because they knew I couldn't golf. So they'd be like, we're going to go golfing. Sorry, you can't come. Maybe you should learn to golf.
We can golf. I'll teach you how to golf so that
Okay,
you never get excluded ever again.
I actually wouldn't mind learning to golf. That's kind of one of my retirement goals. I'm going to go learn how to golf. And
There
then,
you go.
and then later I had another church in rural Missouri, and both of these places are really pretty conservative. And once again, the ministerium, the group of ministers, was really pretty welcoming to me, I have to say.
Mhm.
They weren't particularly interested in, they had some hesitation when we would do community worship services and allowing me, including me in those worship things. But they knew that if I didn't come, then my church wouldn't come. And then there's not a ministerium, right? Like we're not, it's not a group of Christians together. And so they swallowed whatever it is that they needed to swallow. And I led worship with them, and no one died. Nothing burst into flames.
Right. That's amazing.
Man.
Well, Nichole, this has been an awesome conversation. And
you're awesome. I really like you a lot.
We should go get coffee.
Yeah, let's do it.
Also, there is a coffee. I've been back to that coffee place twice now that I went to coffee with you. It's the best Turkish coffee.
Yes.
So yeah, we should go there. And we would love to have you back on to talk about more things, because I feel like we just scratched the surface and I have so much I want to ask you.
I know. And it's my fault that because I have to go coach 5th grade soccer. So I have like a hard stop. So otherwise we would just like keep going and going probably. But
I also want to ask what it felt like to get a call at 14 years old.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. I mean, it was intense. It was intense, but I was really lucky to have people who were supportive, like my grandfather, like my youth minister at church. And then my own kind of spiritual connection with a God who will not let me go, right? No matter how I was like, no, I'm going to go have a job that will actually pay me. Or there are other ways, Lord, that I could lend my skills to helping humanity. And time again, the doors that opened for me were doors that led this way. And so it's wonderful.
Awesome.
It's
so cool.
Nichole, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been awesome. And I feel like we need to have you back on, and you need to help Erin and I through some of our existential questions about death. Are you ready to do that?
That would be very cool.
I'd be delighted.
That came up in an episode the other day. And so, we need professional help with that.
Well, I'd be happy to come back. And today has really been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. A huge heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners. Some of you joined us a year ago, some of you joined us recently, but all of you are helping us grow the show. Thank you so much.
Atheist is still advertising free, sponsor free, and available for free to everyone. Lots of podcasts have big production teams. Our team is just 3 friends working together to make something we hope puts good into the world and brings value to your life.
But we always need your help. Please spread the word and share the show. All of our social links and other ways to support the show are available on atheistpodcast.com.
Atheist is produced by Justin Sywell of Trend Media, STL. Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.